I'm Steve Van Tuyl. I'm the community manager with the Academic Data Science Alliance, and hopefully you're here to participate in a webinar about data science program accreditation as part of our ADSA virtual meeting. It's happening right now. First, a few notes about ADSA and some logistics. So ADSA, just in case you are not familiar with us, is a community of data science researchers and educators taking responsibility for just equitable future where data science approaches are thoughtfully applied in all domains for the benefit of all. If you'd like to learn more about ADSA, you can find us at academicdatascience.org, or you can snap their QR code at the bottom right with your intelligent phone, and you'll be taken to our website. And with that, I'll hand things over to Donna LaLonde, who can introduce themselves and then introduce our other speakers.
Well, welcome everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Donna LaLonde, and I'm at the American Statistical Association. And I'm joined today by two colleagues, Ron Wasserstein, the executive director of the American Statistical Association, and Dave Hunter is a professor of statistics at Penn State, but is serving the ASA in data science accreditation on a number of really important curriculum committees. And we are going to talk to you today a little bit about the data science program accreditation process that is underway via ABET and our participation in CSAB. And so I've already started the use of acronyms, and so I will turn it over to Dave and Ron to add to that alphabet soup.
So thanks, Donna, and thank you everyone for joining. I have been to most of these virtual sessions, but always on the other side, not in one of these Zoom squares, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you today. So first of all, a very brief introduction to the American Statistical Association. For those of you who don't know us, we're the world's largest community of statisticians, second oldest continually operating professional association in the US. Since 1839, we have been around promoting statistical science and data, and now data science. You can see the data science piece of the ASA continuing to grow as you look at, for example, our meetings, a couple of meetings that have data science in the name, and the Conference on Statistical Practice is run through with sessions involving data science. See, we have journals that relate to data science in various ways. And next slide, Donna. You'll see that we also have other groups that focus on data science. In the ASA, sections are what in some of your societies you might call interest groups. And you see the data science connection there. In our education programs, we provide opportunities for students in a couple of ways to challenge themselves with data through the Fall Data Challenge and ASA Data Fest activities, which are held throughout the country. We also have curriculum guidelines that have been developed for various things. Our Code of Conduct Administrator, Nick Horton, has been active in ASA curricular matters and data science matters, and is also one of the editors of one of those journals you saw on the previous page. We accredit statisticians at the student level, at the graduate statistician level, and at the professional statistician level as well. And we're active in advocating for statistics and data science. Next slide, please, Donna. Thanks. So what I'm going to do is what Donna started, which is I'm going to walk you through the alphabet soup that we've all been learning about in order to understand accreditation. And then Dave will talk about the reason you came. He'll talk about program accreditation in data science. Next one, Donna. So ABET is something that you've heard of if there's an engineering program at your school, and probably not otherwise, but it's a very large accrediting body. It accredits programs, and this is key here. It accredits programs, not institutions. In the US, you have regional accrediting bodies that are the institution-wide accreditors, but ABET accredits programs in engineering, applied and natural sciences, computing, and so on. And it's, like I said, it's a very large organization with well over 4,000 accredited programs at a large number of colleges and universities, mostly in the US, but it is an international organization as well. Next one, Donna, thanks. Continuing to drill down very briefly into the ABET structure, which is a complicated structure, to be sure. ABET has 4 commissions. The commissions are set up to basically have accreditation standards for various programs and degrees. And the 2 that are in large font on this slide are the relevant ones to this discussion among the 4 ABET accreditation commissions: Applied and Natural Science Accreditation Commission and the Computing Accreditation Commission are both part of what we will be talking about today. Next, Donna, please. So these accreditations lead and conduct these activities. They review the educational programs, and they are the final decision maker on accreditation. But they're also very much responsible for making sure that accreditation itself is reviewed and enhanced, that criteria are regularly reviewed and refreshed, because these fields grow and change very rapidly. Next one, please. So in addition to the accrediting commissions, there are separately member societies. And the member societies are very important to ABET. They are essentially the organizations that provide the expertise on criteria. And so the CSAB is the one we work with. We'll see that on the next slide. CSAB used to actually stand for something, and now it stands for CSAB. Donna, will you go to the next one? So this is the principal ABET society for the accreditation of degree programs in this list that you see here. And we're here today to talk in particular about data science accreditation. But it's also involved with other member societies in other kinds of accreditation as well. So CSAB has the responsibility for the development of the accreditation criteria and for the selection and training of, and assignment of the program evaluators, the people who actually visit the programs and write a report about those programs. CSAB has seats on the ABET Board of Delegates. Next slide. So a little bit more, there's a board of directors on CSAB that consists of members of the 3 societies of CSAB. ASA is a very recent new member to this. The organization has existed a long time with ACM and IEEECS. Now we joined in 2021, and our representative on that happens to be our 2022 ASA president, Kathy Ensor. Next. Okay, so that's the introduction, the background for all this. And I go over to Dave for the things that you signed up to be here for.
Okay, well, first of all, let me say, please ask lots of questions, because this gets real confusing real fast. Donna alluded to the alphabet soup. and Ron did a pretty nice intro to the alphabet soup. I guess I should also add that the whole reason that ASA is a member of CSAB is because these data science criteria were underway as of last year. And so we sort of joined the party a little bit late, but we were of the mind, we being a bunch of folks from the statistics community, that it would be much better to be involved with this accreditation process than not. And frankly, we also wanted to honor the fact that CSAB and the member institutions of CSAB and ABET more largely recognized that statistics had some important input to provide in developing these criteria. And I say this because, you know, there's I think some sentiment that ABET is far from a perfect organization. And I have to admit that I'm still learning myself. Ron was kind enough not to mention that I actually have to attend these meetings along with Kathy as well, because I'm the alternate. And even I, sitting through these meetings, have a hard time keeping up with some of the internal goings on at ABET, but I will do my best. Okay, so maybe before we launched into this, I see that Jesse has already asked a question, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate to just address the questions as they come in, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it verbally, and let's see how that goes. So Jesse's question is, can you highlight any differences between undergrad and master's programs? I thought I saw ANSAC does both, but CAC only does undergrad. Excellent question. Right now, the DS criteria, the data science criteria, only apply to undergraduate programs. There are some master's level programs that fall under ANSAC, but DS is not among them. Okay, and in fact, this has been a topic of conversation as well. There are some areas in which maybe an associate's degree is a thing. And so there's conversation among the CSAB members as to whether there should be accreditation criteria for the associate's degree in X. But for today, when we're talking about data science, we are talking about undergraduate solely. Excellent question. All right, so as you see on the screen here, there are essentially two sets of criteria that a data science program would have to follow in order to be accredited. There are, first of all, the general criteria. These apply to all programs accredited by an ABET commission. Now, remember, there are two commissions that are relevant for today's discussion, ANSAC and CAC. And you may be wondering, why are there two? The answer is because each one of them independently has proposed and is in the process of affirming or approving data science accreditation criteria. Yes, two sets of criteria. The good news, however, is that after pursuant to ASA getting involved and helping craft some changes, there has been a real move to bring those two sets of DS criteria in line with one another. And that has now happened. And so that's part of what this process will do also. So even though there are two commissions, I want to get the language right, there are two commissions, ANSAC and CAC, each one of them has general criteria, each one of them has program criteria relevant to DS, but the DS parts match, okay? More or less. Whew. Now, one other thing about these general versus program criteria. If you're doing DS, you have to both satisfy the general and the DS specific program criteria. It is possible that programs can be accredited without being part of a program. So if you want ANSAC criteria under the general criteria, our understanding is that you can apply for that. And that's a whole other can of worms that we probably don't want to get into because it really takes us away from data science. Now, Yolanda asks, what is ANSAC and what is CAC? ANSAC stands for, oh goodness, let's see if I can get it here. The Accreditation of Natural Sciences and, no, it's the AC is the Accreditation Commission. NS is
Applied and Natural Sciences.
Thank you, Donna. Donna saves me. Applied and Natural Sciences Accreditation Criteria. And just to riff a little bit on Yolanda's question, the reason that data science criteria are being proposed under the ANSAC criteria is that the thought was that a lot of data science programs existed under mathematics departments or statistics departments. And those really come more under the purview of the natural sciences than computing. Back to Yolanda's question, what is CAC? Okay, I think it's Computing Accreditation Commission. Excellent.
It is.
All right.
And
I'm
Dave,
passing my acronyms test so far. And
maybe
that's
I'll
just what it sounds like. Please,
we said it at the beginning, but I'll just reinforce that we are going to share these slides. So there will not be a quiz at the end, and all of the various letters as they go together are in the slides.
All right, so we've got two sets of criteria, and really the ones that will be of most interest down in the weeds of data science will be the program criteria. There are a couple of things that we want to say about general criteria, but those have more to do with diversity statements, and we'll get to that a little bit later. Go ahead, Donna, please. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are two separate tracks for DS here. And of course, they can't be timed at the same time. Of course, they're offset by a year, right? They have to be, just to make this even more confusing. CAC got a 1-year head start on this process. So the CAC, or Computing Accreditation Criteria, the computing folks, have already advanced a set of data science criteria that will, if finally approved, first go into effect, I now think, as of the 2023-24 cycle. At the moment, however, there are some pilot programs that are being accredited. And in fact, a couple of ASA members have been trained as ABET accreditors. Mita Chedinkaya-Rundel and Ben Baumer, I believe, are the two statisticians who are now serving as accreditors, and even
Dave,
have done this.
Just to clarify, that's program evaluators. That role is program evaluators, and Mina and Ben have been observers of one of the pilot visits of the fall 2021.
Awesome. Yeah. So this is sort of a process that has started on the CAC side, in the sense that there are now pilot programs that are trying to be accredited, I think, or maybe provisionally accredited under what exists currently as the CAC data science criteria. And as you can see on the slides, 2023-24 is now an updated timeline for the final, or the first year that these criteria will be actually used in the official accreditation process. Okay, Donna. So let's see. This is now getting into some of the, well, all right. So as you can see here, under criterion 3, you'll notice that there are outcomes 1 through 5. Okay, outcomes 1 through 5 are part of the general criteria for CAC. Okay, so you imagine that there are some student outcomes that CAC wants to see. 1 through 5 are for any computing program. In addition to that, specific to data science, there is a 6th student outcome, and it's what you see on the screen. Apply theory, techniques, and tools throughout the data science lifecycle and employ the resulting knowledge to satisfy stakeholders' needs. Okay, so again, this is an example of where, in order to get all of your student outcomes to be accredited as a DS program, you have to satisfy 1 through 5 from the general criteria, and then number 6 from the DS specific criteria. Another thing that I'll point out about these slides is that they reflect some of the changes that have taken place over the past year. That's as a result of public comments and questions that have come in, and also, quite frankly, a lot of direct input from ASA. CSAB has been wonderful about soliciting our advice as an association and listening very carefully to the statistical experts who have thought about data science long and hard. they've really tried to incorporate our input into these criteria. And one of the comments that was made early on was that data analysis should be replaced by data science. And so you'll see that reflected in several places here. So this is a question about who conducts the evaluations and the qualifications for becoming an evaluator. If you want, if you don't mind, I'm going to stick a pin in that one and come back to it later. So please don't let me forget to address this anonymous question regarding being trained as an evaluator. And thank you for correcting my language, Donna. PEV, program. PEVs, maybe it's just program evaluator, but PEV is our 3 letters that get thrown around a lot in reference to these folks. So we'll come back to that question. Okay, Don, I think we can move on to the next slide. Okay, now we get to the specific DS criteria in criterion 5, which is about the curriculum. And now you really start to see where the statistics community had a lot of influence in the modification of these DS criteria, which, by the way, had already been in existence for about a year by the time the ASA joined this party. And again, better late than never. And CSAB has made it very clear that they're thrilled to have the ASA as part of this group. The reason that we weren't there from the outset has too much to do with lots of misunderstandings. It's just not even worth getting into. We're here now, and a lot of what you see in the screen in red reflects input that was provided by probably tens of ASA members who sat in on various webinars and Zoom sessions over the spring/summer/fall of 2021. I'll just let you read that. I'm not going to read them to you. I will just riff a little bit on some of this stuff. One of the things that happened was that the original criteria basically had a whole bunch of detailed things that had to be included under the computing category. But then there was like one line of math and statistics. And one of the things that we felt as a professional association, I'm talking about ASA now, is that maybe we ought to expand that a little bit. So what you're seeing here reflects that, among other discussion items that happened, again, over the past, gosh, I guess about year. When did we start this? Was it February, Ron? I want to say year. Okay, yeah, it's been about a year that ASA has been part of this. So we're doing our best to ramp up quickly, and this webinar that you're currently watching is part of that ramping up process. Let's see. I don't believe that there's anything here that isn't self-explanatory. So why don't we move on, please, Donna? Okay. Again, we're just clicking through criterion 5. This is it. This is the end of criterion 5. So what you saw on the previous slide and this slide reflect what should be in the curriculum according to CAC if you want to be accredited as a data science program. And here you can just see a couple of small, almost cosmetic changes to the wording. I do want to make the point that the ANSAC criteria for data science, which we are not going to see in these slides in the same level of detail, actually track, I believe, perfectly with what you just saw. Actually, wait a minute. These are on the slides, right? Aren't they, Donna? Okay. I've been reading so many of these things. I can't remember what I saw on a website recently and what I've seen on the slides. So again, if you really want to test yourself, check me on this statement that what you're seeing here will track with what the ANSAC criteria also say about data science criteria. Okay, let's go on one more, please, Donna. Now, what we were just looking at were proposed changes, not changes, excuse me. Those were the proposed criteria for data science programs under CAC. Separate to that, there are some proposed changes to the general criteria. And if you are interested, you yourself can comment on what you see on this screen right here. This is one of the many websites that I should probably link you to, because there's a website you can go to and make a comment on
Actually,
what we're
David,
staring at right
they're
now.
in the
Go ahead.
slides. They're in the slides at the very end. And
course they are.
so
Okay.
everybody will have not only acronym heaven, but link heaven.
Thank you, Donna. I should also add that Donna put these slides together, and Donna always is very thorough. So of course those links are in the slide. Yeah, so you'll notice here that there is a proposed change to add the words "and equitable" in the general criteria. Now, I'm just going to give you a bit of a preview. There are also some proposed changes to the ANSAC general criteria, and they also have to do with language regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion. What you'll notice is that in these general criteria, there is no longer a match between CAC and ANSAC. The general criteria look very different. As well, you might expect them to, come to think of it, right? Because one of them is natural sciences criteria and one of them is computing criteria. So when you're talking about what a general program in either one of those areas might look like, naturally, there are going to be quite a lot of differences. Each one of them, remember, has now got DS-specific criteria, and those are the ones that track very closely together. And that's partly because, you know, those of us who are now involved in this process insisted that that be the case. We really don't want two separate notions of what it means to be accredited by ABET under data science, one under ANSAC and one under CAC. That just seems like a bad idea. But here, if you're interested in commenting on what you see on this slide, you are in fact invited to do so. And as Donna said, you'll have a link at the end. I think we can move on at this point, Donna. Okay, let's see what we've got here. I'm sorry, I'd forgotten that the CAC actually had two pieces. Yes, so this is a continuation of what we saw on the previous slide. And you'll notice that under 4, there's more language that has to do with diversity here. There's also a small tweak to this privacy and security idea, right? So all of these changes are being proposed currently for the general criteria for CAC. You're invited to comment on that, and ABET will see what you have to say if you're so moved. Next slide, please, Donna. Okay, that was CAC. Now remember, CAC is a year ahead. When I showed you the criteria for data science, those are basically now in the pipeline. Those are ready to be deployed, modulo a couple of small changes. For instance, I think that Mina and Ben have actually suggested adding the word applied in front of statistics based on what they viewed during their pilot observations, right? But mostly the DS criteria for CAC have been cemented, at least in their first iteration, as I understand it. On the other hand, that's not true for ANSAC. The reason for that is because ANSAC is a year behind CAC, and so ANSAC still has a year of public comment left to go. So that's the precursor to what you're about to see. And what we're looking at here is no longer changes, right? You remember that for CAC, what we saw was a lot of red text, a lot of crossing out and whatnot. That's because CAC, being a year ahead, actually reflects changes to the original criteria, whereas these are proposed criteria. These are the first versions of the criteria that are being proposed by ANSAC. And if you remember what you saw a few slides ago, you will, I'd be really impressed for one thing. And secondly, you'll see that these match. So under number 1, you see exactly the same stuff. The only difference here is the sort of the preamble there. There's a different set of things that are said about curriculum writ large, but once you start tracking the actual content of a DS curriculum, it's the same between ANSAC and CAC. Okay, so I guess the punchline, you've seen 1A through 1F already under the CAC criteria. So Donna, could you please show us the next slide? And once again, 2A through 2D, if you are really, really paying attention, should look exactly familiar. Because the only thing that's different here is, again, that preamble for the ANSAC curriculum stuff. And Donna, let's go to 3, 4, and 5. And there they are. And by the way, you'll notice here that the words domain have been twice. So in the CAC, there was, domain was there and crossed out. That's partly to bring CAC criteria in line with ANSAC criteria. So the word domain doesn't even occur in this set. Okay, so that's ANSAC. Now, I mentioned earlier that you, as a member of the public, are welcome to comment on the CAC. Please
Dave,
go ahead, Donna.
I think you still have a little bit more ANSAC to do, and then we'll get to the.
Oh yeah, I'm still talking about ANSAC.
Okay.
In fact, if you could just go right back to the previous slide for just one moment. So these criteria for data science programs under ANSAC are currently on the web page, and there is comment solicited, right? So you are being asked to comment on these criteria, unlike for the CAC criteria, which are a year ahead in the process, right? But if you see something here that you would like to comment on, by all means, please do so. That is why this period happens. Again, the link will be made available to you at the end. And this is just like I said earlier that you could comment on the diversity language under the CAC general criteria. This will be a separate link where you can comment on the DS specific criteria under ANSAC. And now, Donna, moving on to the next slide. There are also changes to the general ANSAC criteria, in case this isn't confusing enough. And you'll notice that D there is a proposed addition to the general criteria. Now, you'll see that this new language would reflect diversity, inclusion, and equity. You will also notice that this is not the same language that's being proposed under the CAC general criteria. Again, CAC and ANSAC have very different looking criteria for their general criteria, even though they line up for data science. And so in this case, for instance, the way that the diversity language is being proposed for ANSAC looks very different. But again, if you would like to comment, this is now a third chance that you have to comment as a member of the public. You have a link, as Donna mentioned, it'll be at the end of this talk. You can find the link to the general criteria changes being proposed for ANSAC, and it's what you're looking at on the screen. You are asked to comment. We welcome you to do so. It's actually not we who welcome you to do that. It's ABET that's welcoming you to do so. Okay, I think we're ready to move on to the next slide, Donna. Oh, I got through. Hooray.
You did. And I'm actually just going to go quickly through some of the important dates that refer to the commenting period that Dave has talked about throughout. And this is where you'll have the links. So the ANSAC proposed criteria for data science, data analytics, and similarly named programs. And Dave mentioned accreditation is possible under the general criteria, but it's if your program has program specific criteria, then you must satisfy the program criteria. You can't choose to just do the general. You must satisfy the program criteria. So the key date is June 15th, and this is the link. And we really, a part of why we wanted to join you today is to really encourage you to dig in and to make comments, because as Dave mentioned, and I think Ron as well, we really do feel like there was improvement because of the contributions of the broader community. So please do take time. It's a very easy link to follow, and there's a comment box, and I guess that's all I have to say about that. And I think I'm going to say the same thing about the ANSAC and CAC general criteria. It's the same date, so it's June 15th. But they are separate links to make comments. And these again allow you to comment on the diversity language that was added. And so so both of these, also all three close again on the 15th, but please do make comments. And also please encourage your colleagues to make comments, right? I think we would really appreciate you sharing this information with colleagues as well. And the ask, right? The opportunity to participate. So Dave mentioned that that there were pilot program reviews for the CAC criteria because of where they are in the criteria cycle. ANSAC is now ready to have pilot program reviews and would welcome if you have interest to reach out to Scott Murray. Scott is a member of the CSAB Board of Directors. He's been serving on the curriculum committees, and he is coordinating the pilot review process. And Scott's can be, well, he said he welcomes questions and would be happy to talk with you about the process. The deadline for expressing your interest is October 1, because there's just a little bit of paperwork that you will have to do to be considered in the pilot program process. I guess the other thing that I will add is that for those of you who may be joining us at the joint statistical meetings in Washington in August in person, we will be having an information session about the work and responsibilities of program evaluators. And so if you think you might have an interest in becoming a program evaluator, and we'll be at JSM, be on the lookout for that information session. If you're not at JSM, but think that you have an interest, please feel free to reach out to either Ron or me, and we'll be happy to talk with you about what is involved in the process. It is a significant commitment, but I think that it's really important service. So encourage folks to think about that. And with that, I'm going to go to questions, which when I'm sharing my screen, I can't really see. So I'm going to stop sharing because I think you've now appreciated the wonderful question graphic sufficiently. And I'll stop sharing and we can have a conversation. Oh, and then I'll just say, obviously, thank you and our emails, and all of us would be happy to answer questions via email after at any time.
So I tried to answer a question regarding program evaluators that was asked anonymously. And in doing so, I actually have obliterated the first part of the question. I think it was a two-parter. It was, who's involved in this and how do you get involved, or something like that. I may get the first part wrong. I typed a link into the Q&A that gives more information about how to become a PEV, a program evaluator. It's a process you have to go through. You have to become trained. And I should say that this kind of is a segue into Richard Ressler's question, who asks, what is considered advanced data science coursework? The best answer I can give you is I don't know, Richard, because this is beyond the purview of the sort of planning of the criteria themselves. This gets into what does an evaluator do when that person is on the ground. I wish that if Mina or Ben happens to be on this call, they are the two PEVs that I happen to know personally. They would be the best people to talk about what it is specifically that an evaluator is looking for in order to determine whether a program has exactly satisfied these criteria that Richard is referring to.
And actually, Dave, I might just jump in. Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely.
But actually, it is a part of the training. So what happens before you go, before you become a program evaluator, ABET has ABET has a training sort of that is for all potential program evaluators, regardless of the program. And so you go through that training. And then after that training, you are assigned as an observer. So you join a team of experienced program evaluators and actually go all the way through the process, but you're an observer. You would not be voting on whether or not the program should be accredited. And then once you've been the observer, then you can be assigned as a team, as a member of a team. So it's a quite lengthy process to become a program evaluator, but in terms of the learning what satisfies the criteria, that's a part of that initial training, as well as the training that you go through once you've been assigned as an observer.
I just wanted to comment also on, so Nick Horton in the chat requested that we share some of the links that occurred at the end of Donna's presentation into the chat window. I just added a link to where you can comment on all the things, right? So we actually mentioned 3 opportunities that are particularly relevant to what we talked about for public comment. Basically, all of the changes that are being proposed for public comment are at the link that I showed here on the chat, including those 3. So if you just scroll down, you'll see ANSAC, then you'll see CAC, then you'll see the other 2 commissions, but those aren't relevant to the data science stuff.
And Dave, there was I think it was in the chat that that says that ASA is not listed as an affiliate organization for program evaluator eligibility. And that's because what will happen is that the ASA will make recommendations to CSAB on candidates for program evaluators, and then it's actually CSAB that moves that forward.
Well, and also though, I can tell you, having just gone through the process of applying for this, when I emailed the director of CSAB about this, she was like, "Oh my gosh, you're kidding! They haven't added ASA to the list yet. I'm going to get right on these people." So there's clearly a lot of sort of red tape that has to. So we tell CSAB about something, and then Liz gets on the horn to somebody at ABET. So you're absolutely right, Jess Stahl and others. They aren't yet quite up to date. They actually advised me how to apply as an ASA member, even though ASA was not one of the choices. And if you email me separately, and if you're interested in going through the PEV application process, I can help with that because I've just done this and I know exactly what you're talking about, Jess.
So I think the first one is, how does data science, an undergraduate program at an institution program, determine whether to pursue ANSAC or CAC criteria for its accreditation?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that the key is, which one of the general criteria are you closer to satisfying? My understanding is that you get to choose. So the program can say, I would like to be accredited under the ANSAC DS criteria. And then it's not like ABET is going to say, no, you should go for CAC. So I think what you want to do if you're a program thinking about doing this is to look at the general criteria and see which of those is closer to what your program is already like.
Yeah, and maybe this is an obvious follow-on to that, but you probably want to have conversations with other programs on campus, because if there is already accrediting, if a program is already accredited under CAC, then you have some expertise moving through that versus ANSAC. So,
yeah, Robin asked about undergraduate program. Is it restricted to BS, or are certificate programs accredited? My understanding, Robin, is that it is, yes, restricted to bachelor's of science programs only, degrees only. I think that certificate programs are a whole separate can of worms. I say this based on sitting in the CSAB board meeting. Like when it comes to associate's degrees, I think that certificate programs were lumped into that conversation, i.e. that's not part of what we're talking about currently.
What are the speaker's thoughts about the feasibility in an undergrad degree of covering all of these areas: computer science, statistics, domain, plus ethical training, other soft skills like communication, diversity training, etc.?
So my reading of the question is that you're a little bit nervous that that's actually going to be possible for a program to meet all these criteria. So if that's the case, I think I would say that there probably are programs that feel they already meet these criteria. And I guess we'll learn a little bit more about the answer to your question, Torbit, as these pilot programs go through the process. It may be that the bar that has been set is a little bit too high to clear. I think, though, that the feeling at least in the statistics community, as I understand it, is that a solid DS program could do these things. And we should, if we're going to be accrediting programs, be a little bit aspirational in trying to set the bar. But if you're sort of implying that this seems like a pretty high bar to clear, I think your point is well taken. And I think time will tell whether or not it's a little bit too high for right now, because we haven't calibrated it yet.
So Dave, there was a follow-up in the chat from Steve about bachelor's programs. So from my understanding, I mean, it says bachelor's program. So it doesn't say Bachelor of Arts or Bachelor of Science. It just says bachelor's programs. And so if your BA met the general criteria and the program criteria, you could be considered for accreditation.
Yeah, and it sounds like Sridhar actually has some knowledge about this. I think I misspoke and said BS when what I really meant was bachelor's degrees. My apologies. Thank you, Sridhar, for clarifying.
Some data science programs exist as tracks within other majors rather than as separate entities. For example, at the University of Washington, that has been the institutional approach. How would accreditation work in that setting?
So excellent question. And my understanding is that if you meet the criteria and your program has one of those words in it, then you're good. So I don't think that it has to be a major that is a data science major. If you have a data science option under the major of X and you meet the criteria, my understanding is that's okay. But please correct me if I'm wrong, anybody who knows better.
I think that's why they use the language program accreditation and not major.
Yeah, as long as it's an undergraduate four-year program.
Right.
As long as it's one of those and it meets the criteria, I think that's all that you need to do.
That's all the questions in.
And Nick raises an excellent point. You know, so it's sort of funny to get involved in this ABET process, given that there has been, I don't know how many decades of discussion about what a statistics program ought to look like, and then a data science program in the statistics community. And all I can say is, you know, we're trying to bring as much of that expertise and long-earned thought into this process as possible, recognizing again that it's sort of better to be part of the ABET process because this train has left the station. But like I said, Nick raises an excellent point. There may at some point be, you know, a little bit of discrepancy between what ABET is saying and what experts in, let's say, the statistics community have been saying. I think over time, those differences are going to get ironed out, though. At least that's my sincere hope.
So there's a question about what about applied baccalaureate degrees from two-year institutions? Based on what Dave said, those would be eligible. And if
did you mean ineligible? I think ineligible, Jess. I don't think those would be eligible. But
yeah, I guess I'd need maybe Jess could tell us what the example is of a two-year institution being able to offer a baccalaureate degree. Is there some kind of transfer, some kind of articulation agreement or that? But if it's a baccalaureate degree, I guess I don't know it. I mean, if it's called a bachelor's degree, I'm not sure I guess like a Bachelor of Applied Studies, something like that. The other question was how about minors? And I think, again, the answer is it's program accreditation. So if you meet the criteria, then
Yeah,
there.
I think Sridhar has actually addressed Jess's question in the chat here. So yeah, if it's a 2-year program, that might not be eligible.
Yeah, but Jess is saying they are bachelor's degrees in subjects approved by state legislature. So it's
Yeah,
I think it's a gray area.
Boy, I really don't know. It's a very good question.
Maybe Jess, what we can do is we can follow up and we can get back to you. We can ask our colleagues on the commission. There's a question about what about room for data science embedded in the engineering majors accredited by ABET?
And no, we didn't discuss this already, Ray.
Yeah.
Goodness.
I might make a small observation that it remains the same thing, that programs are accredited, not majors, even in engineering. And Scott's on there. Yeah,
Scott's
and so that's where I was going. So engineering may have a program or whatever in civil engineering or whatever it might be, and could be accredited by ABET, but they would have to also have a data science program, and then it would be separately accredited, even if it was within some other program. Yeah, very glad to have Scott.
Yeah, I was.
Scott has been.
I feel much better now that Scott's on.
Yeah, well, and Scott has been, not only greatly involved in this process from the beginning, but very helpful.
Extremely helpful
in working with us. Yeah.
Thank you, Scott. I mentioned earlier how interested CSAB has been in hearing from the statistics community. Scott has led that process of trying to weave together the existing data science criteria with what the statisticians started saying midway through the process. And Scott's done just a beautiful job. He's very diplomatic. So thank you, Scott. I don't mean to embarrass you here, but you've been instrumental in helping this whole thing work. So thank you.
Is there reference for defining some of the terms of art that may not be interpreted the same across CAC and ANSAC, EJ? For example, data representativeness.
So this harkens back to the question that was sort of how do you define advanced work in data science? Again, I think this is sort of getting into the purview of how do we train the PEVs, the program evaluators. And frankly, that's beyond my pay grade today. I don't know the answer to that question right now. I'm not sure whether any of the folks who are on the chat can offer any insight into that. Like how do you get down into the specifics about, let's say, data representativeness?
And so I think that is a part of the PEV. So I think we're almost out of time, but I did want to come back to the question about master's programs and make sure folks saw Scott's reply. Definitely working toward both associate and master's programs. They're in the works, and to be honest, on an accelerated track to have a first reading or first vote. But I think one of the things that Mina and Ben commented to us, Dave, was that they learned what counts as evidence, right? And as a part of the conversations with the program review committee, you come to a consensus if the evidence has been presented sufficiently. But I do think there is some guidance on the ABET website in terms of what a self-study should look like. So I think that gets to the art question as well.
So a couple more questions. All right, so Torbert asks, actually, is the meeting 30 more minutes? I think the answer is officially no. However, Steve at the outset sort of went over this and asked if we might have a few extra minutes. And I think that the answer for all three of us was yes. And so my understanding is that we may actually spill over now that it's actually officially 4:30. We may actually spill over maybe up to about a half an hour more, depending upon whether there's still comments, questions. And there's another one by Torbert. So what do panelists think about the rapid creation and growth of such programs when there are so many things still to work out? Very good question. Probing a little deeper, what do you think are some of the drivers for the creation and growth of these programs? Boy, I wouldn't even begin to try to get that second one. What are some of the drivers? However, I do at least personally have a thought about the first part of the question that Torbert asked. You know, what about trying to work out some of these things in a community that's so rapidly evolving? I think that we have to do it. I mean, you know, if we wait around until we know what a data science program looks like, and then go through the process of building ABET accreditation criteria, by the time we do, if there's one thing I've learned from working with ABET, it's that it's going to be a several year-long process, and by that time the field will have changed. And so my personal view on this is we're not going to get it right the first time, but we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good here. So I take Torbert's point well, but I'm pretty happy, frankly, with where this process is today. In other words, it doesn't strike me that somehow this process is completely out of step with what data science actually looks like in 2022. And hopefully that will continue to be the case going forward. But like I said, I take your point.
There was a question about the inclusion of the new SIP codes for data science on the DHS list, but I think that between the exchange, it got clarified that that was separate from our conversation today about accreditation.
Also, I love the point that Sridhar just made in the chat. You know, the criteria that we're talking about, that's kind of the baseline, right? And so programs are free to make their programs in any way they feel stronger than these baseline criteria. That's an excellent point. And go ahead, Donna, please.
There was Ray had a comment about, I just wondered what direction ABET might be thinking about how much data science engineers should get as part of their undergraduate education. And I think we're clueless, yeah. But Scott might have some insights.
Well said. Yeah, and Scott also just beautifully summed up this like sort of let's not let the perfect be the enemy of the good.
Well, and Dave, I guess we should let people know that accreditation isn't for life, right? So it's a 5 or 6 year period. I don't remember, and then you have to apply. You have to submit another program review for continuing accreditation. So I assume that also addresses the continuous improvement model potentially as well.
Yeah, and now Torbert has sort of added a little bit to his initial question / comment. He meant the colleges creating the degrees and not necessarily ABET creating the criteria. Yeah, again, fair point. And I think that maybe there is the slight risk that if ABET is putting out these criteria, and then a university gets started on building a DS program according to the criteria, and by the time they've ramped up the program, the world looks a little bit different. I think that is a little bit of a risk. But I don't know what the alternative might be. And I think it's better to have criteria in place that reflect our current understanding of this field than not. But yeah, I think Torbert has raised some really hard issues, and boy, we'll get them worked out.
And then Scott did confirm that the engineering folks control their criteria. So it is the EAC, Engineering Accreditation Commission, that would make decisions, those criteria decisions, back to the previous question. There's something in chat. How are institutions growing data science programs? Are there benchmarks?
So many answers to that question, boy. And I guess if Steve might tell you, tune in next week and you'll hear the University of Washington or Wisconsin, and I can't remember which two schools, but yeah, I don't think there's any one answer to Kevin's question. I think every institution is doing what it can. And I can tell you from the perspective of somebody working at Penn State University, the politics of the place comes into play, right? The administrative structure. I mean, none of these things can be ignored. Because data science is a genuinely interdisciplinary field. So that makes it hard to do no matter where you are. And so every institution is going to answer that a little bit differently. And I think the real value of webinars like the one that's coming up next, where we're going to hear from two specific programs, is you listen to these and you start to think to yourself, all right, now which one of these would actually potentially work at my institution, right? Because nobody is going to be able to replicate Penn State's data science program at their institution. There's just too many local eccentricities that have to be navigated. So Kevin, it's a terrific question. And if you can come up with a generic answer, I think we would all love to hear it.
I might just throw in here again another reminder, a plea to respond to these requests for input. Again, the links will be on the slides. People pay attention to the input. It's not your time is not wasted by taking a moment to provide feedback to these groups that are working on these criteria.
Yeah, thanks for the comments, Scott. And I can tell you that Scott really does read these comments and really does think about them. And Scott's the one who, again, is leading the criteria molding process.
So I just went to the ABET website and found a document called ANSAC Self-Study Questionnaire, which is about 32 pages that I think is supposed to help one prepare for the self-study. So there are materials on the website that I think could also start to address some of the questions of what does a program have to do to demonstrate.
So I want to thank you all for joining us today, and to our speakers for filling us in on what is a complicated process, but one that we're all working through and that we can all participate in. Again, a quick reminder that we have our last data science conversations session next week at the same time as this one, 12:30 p.m. Pacific. And there's a link to register for that Zoom meeting in the chat right now, but you can also find information about that session on the ADSA website, academicdatascience.org. And with that, we look forward to seeing maybe some of you next week, some of you possibly next month in Irvine, California, and maybe others of you online or in person at some point in the future. Thank you.